Hey there, Kevin. I was wanting to give a defense of Pascal's wager because I think it's really been underrated. Now, I don't think it's quite as good of a wager argument as my one against exhaustive defined determinism, but I still think it's better than it's generally purported to be. Now, it's important to note that Pascal's wager isn't an argument for the existence of God, but it's an argument that belief in the existence of God is more rational than belief in the non-existence of God. Or non-belief in the existence of God, if you want to word it that way. So the basic argument is that there are two options: either God exists or God doesn't exist. And there's two options on the other side. Either you could believe in God or you could not believe in God. Now, if God doesn't exist and you don't believe in God, you get some small benefit from not having any restrictions on how you live your life. And if God doesn't exist and you believe in God, you have a small detriment from the restrictions placed on your life by your religion, which were unnecessary in view of the fact that the religion was false. Now, if God does exist, and you didn't believe in God, then you'll suffer eternal torment. And if God exists, but you did believe in God, then you benefit from eternal reward. This is the classic sort of structure. And I've seen a couple main counter-arguments. Now, I did hear at one point someone trying to use the Pascal's beggar argument against Pascal's wager. But when I looked it up again recently to make sure I was getting it right, I didn't really see how it would apply necessarily to Pascal's wager. And to the extent it did, I felt like I'm covering that elsewhere. So the two main arguments I see are what I call like the anti-God argument, which is to say, okay, well, you got the option where you believe in God, and God exists, you get the infinite benefit, and if God doesn't exist, you get the infinite loss. Well, if we create another God, and say, well, this God, if you believe in God, he'll give you infinite punishment. But if you don't believe in God, then he'll give you an infinite benefit. As I say, well then, the atheist makes it slightly ahead, because in the case where God doesn't exist, there's a slight benefit. And the other two cancel them out, it sells out. And then the second counter-argument is, I call it like the improper motivation argument. Basically, and I had someone actually use this one when I gave a similar argument to Pascal's wager, that this is not really a reason that you ought to believe in God, or to use his word specifically, God wouldn't want you to believe for that reason. Now, if I take the first argument, there are a couple ways to go about countering the anti-God argument. The first one, and it's really easy to go wrong when doing this sort of analysis. So check me and make sure that my logic holds, but if we're going to just start creating arbitrary gods, well, then we can keep going. We don't need to just have the two. So if we take the whole matrix of believing in that particular God, believing in any other God, or not believing in any God, and the benefit or detriment you get. And I'm just going to use it ones and zeros, rather than the infinities and the small amounts, because really, the small amount on atheism, if no God exists, really it probably should just be zero. I don't know of any lack of restrictions on your life that could counteract the fact that on atheism your life doesn't matter. And so you say, well, maybe you're having the delusion that your life matters if God doesn't exist, but the fact that it's a delusion doesn't matter if nothing matters. So anyway, we got the whole matrix, and if you count how beneficial it is for each of the options, then actually belief in A or belief in C come out on top, because in both of those cases you get 4 points compared to 3 points on atheism. But again, you should check me to make sure that I'm including all the possibilities. Now you may say, okay, well, what if we add like an anti-A that specifically says, well, if you believe in A, then I'll give you the 0. But in an arbitrary other case, we'll give you a 1. But we could also fabricate another one that says, well, if you believe in A, I'll give you a 1. And then arbitrarily in another case, I'll also give you a 1 or a 0. So, I don't think that's really a counter. Now, another thing is, moving back to the just God and anti-God scenario. Well, if you're saying that this is a counter to the wager, you need the possibility of the anti-God to exist to justify your position in the wager. We can ask the question, if you agree with the wager in the normal circumstance, saying that it would be better to believe in God on the original wager, and you need the possibility of the anti-God in order not to hold to the position that you should believe in God. To what extent are you believing in God? Because the anti-God is God, a God. And so you're undermining your own position by believing in God. And this leads into my third counter-argument to the anti-God argument, which is we don't really need to just ignore the probabilities. And I think this is where they try to bring Pascal's mugger in, but I don't think it really applies, because we don't really need to look at the chance of atheism, because there's really atheism being true, because there's really not very much difference. So you just need to compare the different possible gods being true. Plus, I think the whole Pascal's mugger thing is basically just saying that people do math bad anyway, based on what I was saying. And it's this exercise that I think handles the other objection of improper motivations. Because once you say, well, let me investigate which one's true, in order to adjust your percentages, at that point you could gain the proper motivation. Like I said at the start, this whole thing isn't a proof that God exists, but it's supposed to be a proof or evidence, because I suppose you could, if you had some really wacky percentages, that atheism is irrational. And the thing is, you have to put those percentages out there. Are you really saying that the anti-God is equally less likely as the regular God? You have to say it's at least as likely in order to justify using the anti-God argument. Of course, that's ignoring the matrix too, but to make an addendum, going back to the chart, it seems to be that the symmetry breaker is that you can believe in a different God, but you can't believe in a different lack of God. Now, possibly this leads to the most specific God possible being the best performing. But, as I've already said, you really need to put the percentages on it, because that's going to make a difference. And the fact that the result changes when you change the percentages is what makes it worse than, for example, my wager argument against belief in exhaustive divine determinism, where the percentages don't matter. But I still think it's useful. One thing that it does show is that belief in a non-jealous God is suboptimal in basically every scenario. Because you could just believe in the jealous God and still get the non-jealous God for free. And that was actually the situation that I used it in before. So if you believe in the non-jealous God, then you ought to make every effort to determine whether there's some other God that is actually real. Now, my understanding is that generally the religions that have the less jealous gods say something to the effect of, well, if you have heard the true religion, the non-jealous one, so they say, and then reject it, then you're out. So that prevents people from doing this sort of game. I think Mormons and Islam both do that, but I'm not the most well versed in those.